All right, so there's a little bit of a background story about this interesting speaker. Adam and I first got in touch with others several years ago. I was with a company in the healthcare space, and Adam and I, our paths crossed. And every so often you meet that person and you say, wow. And so we had an ongoing dialogue. And after I left that venture to start my new company, Adam and I kept in touch because we liked to debate and discuss things that are going on in the industry. We also had some mutual interests as well. And one of our constant conversations was sales and marketing effectiveness. And rooted in a lot of those discussions were ABM, account-based marketing. And account-based marketing is a very, very touchy subject. If somebody says it's not, then they're lying to you. There's been a lot of promise around ABM, but the reality is there haven't been as many successful implementations or the volume that people had anticipated. And what I loved about my discussions with Adam, he took a very different approach. He was actually looking at life cycles, at which point should firms actually embrace ABM, and then ultimately ABX, bringing the experience into it. And also a pragmatic approach to say, you don't necessarily need to mortgage your house to buy an ABM platform. There are approaches. So, of all the people, all the ABM practitioners, what I saw with Adam is his ability to turn around and actually walk a company through its life cycle, based on market dynamics. So he's going to share a lot of the information today. More importantly, Adam's got a new book out, Total Customer Growth: Win and Grow Customers for Life with ABM and ABX. We're going to give out a copy of this at the end of the show. And Adam, I did read through this. No BS. I love it. It's every so often you read a book, it's like, and for the work I'm doing for competitive analytics, I'm reading a lot of academic stuff. It's like, oh my God, you can't implement this stuff. With your book, it's just the opposite. Okay. So everything here is pragmatic, including little allusions to politics and dealing with the corporate BS. So it's great on that. So I'm going to briefly introduce Adam and let him take over. So Adam, as I mentioned, is a sales and seasoned marketing executive, and he's been in our seats, folks. He's got a great agency now based in Austin, Texas, called Health Launchpad. And he's probably doing the most interesting ABM and ABX implementations around the world. So we're talking with somebody today who has just incredible experience. And, I'm going to say plug, he's actually a really, really nice guy too. So, but like a lot of CME sessions, feel free to raise your hand, ask, we'll have questions along the way. But this is an interactive session, and having worked with Adam before, I know he appreciates that. So by all means, jump in. I'm going to switch us to focus mode so we can see your face as well, Adam. So Adam, I'm going to turn it over to you, and let's, bring us up to speed a little bit on what you're doing. I know you're going to be having a presentation to show as well, but tell us about a little bit more about you and the agency.
Cool. Thank you. I so appreciate, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I feel very, very honored. Just a little bit about me and my background. I kind of had a career in three parts. I started my career in advertising in the tail end of the Mad Men days in London. And advertising in London in the 80s was just about as much fun as you think it might be. It was brilliant. It was like, I still look back on that sort of first 3 years of my advertising career being the most fun period. But I then met and married a Texan and moved to Houston, which is not exactly the advertising capital of the world, but I was lucky to join Ogilvy and Mather there, and I worked and actually that was my first experience to B2B, working with the long forgotten now compact computers. And so that was my first experience of B2B, and I kind of got the bug there. And I've worked for most of my advertising career in B2B, working with IBM and some other companies in the space. And then in the mid-90s, like many people, I got the internet bug, and I'd actually jumped into the digital space I think in 97, 96, joining the digital arm of Grey Advertising. And I worked there for a couple of years. And that's when I then met John Stone. We worked together at a fantastic Boston-based company called Viant, which was one of the sort of the Viant, Science, Sapient, and then another company called Organic. And publicly traded. At one point, I think we had a higher valuation than Ford Motor Company, which was ridiculous and turned out to be ridiculous because when the dot-com crash happened, firms like Viant immediately just kind of like almost went out of business. Went out of business within a matter of years, and so sadly that finished. I had my first startup experience following that. I've always had a startup bug, and I've started 6 companies. A couple of them I'm not embarrassed to talk about. The other 4 I'd probably rather not talk about. The 2 of them didn't work, so I went back into gainful employment, back into the agency space in New York, running the New York office of a digital agency called Organic for about 7 or 8 years. And like many people, I got into my 40s, and I always figure that when you're in your 40s in the agency business, if you don't own it or run it, you're living on borrowed time, and you've got a kind of an 18-month half-life. And so I figured I better start, really figure out how to just run my own business, because I just couldn't be dependent on a paycheck from an agency anymore. And so I was doing some interesting consulting, helping to assess the strength of relationships between agencies and clients. And we had some technology to do that. And in the process of doing that, I was chatting to a friend of mine who's a physician. And he said, I don't know how much you know about healthcare, which is nothing. He said, but the relationship between doctors and the hospitals is a broken relationship. Hospitals are dependent on the doctors basically for patients. And it's a really broken sort of relationship. And so we started doing that consulting. And I remember my first meeting, we went into a hospital to pitch to the management of the hospital. And I realized the last time I'd been in a hospital was 20 years prior when my son was born. And it was like walking into a parallel universe. Totally different language, totally different business dynamics. It was a real learning curve for me. But about 6 months into doing this consulting, we had an idea for some technology. And we pitched the idea to one of our customers, and he said, "You build that, I'll buy it." And so we actually then went and launched this software company it's what's called clinical communications. So it was basically a mobile application that securely helped physicians and nurses communicate more effectively with each other across a healthcare system. And it had a bunch of workflow tools with it. And we raised some money, got on board some partners, scaled up the company a little bit, and had a good run for about 7 years. And then eventually exited the company, selling it to a company called Harris Healthcare in 2019. And I kind of took a little break and then thought to myself, I want to go back to my first roots, which is marketing, but I have a real passion for healthcare and healthcare technology. And I thought about the problems that I'd face running this software company. And there were kind of 2 things. One is the healthcare market is really hard to navigate, particularly if you were like me originally, which is a complete newbie. The other thing is that in B2B sales cycles are long and in some cases getting longer. In healthcare, the sales cycles are, probably 50% longer. The buying by a collective, the group of people that you're selling to are usually bigger, much more varied. Compliance is a bigger problem. And so I thought, that was actually where I started to really learn about ABM. And I realized that I'd actually been practicing parts of ABM in the early stage of the business. And then unfortunately, I think towards the end, we kind of lost the plot a bit on that. And I think that's when we became less successful. And so I decided that I really wanted to double down on ABM and learn it. And so, you know, in many regards, I'm a relative, you know, ABM, somebody corrected me the other day on LinkedIn, says ABM is actually in its third decade. I thought it was the second decade. It's been around for, you know, I think one of the first books written on it was written by somebody called Bev Burgess from an organization called ITSMA, probably about 20 something years ago. But as you know, as Rob said, it hasn't gained as much traction as you know, marketing automation or inbound marketing. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that, and I want to delve into that. But I'm very passionate about the principles of ABM, and that's what the book is about. It's less about the use of technology, although technology can do really amazing things with technology in ABM, but more about the general principles about that. So, you know, if you'll humor me for the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to talk you through, you know, the problems that I think ABM can help with, what the principles of ABM are. And I apologize to anybody out there who's like, does ABM for a living, or, you know, I'm teaching you stuff that you know. And then I want to talk about why I'm trying to take a fresh approach and what total customer growth is about, our take on ABM. So I've got a few slides on this. I'll put this in slideshow mode. I'm going to kind of assume that you're seeing a slide that it didn't.
Yeah, perfect.
Yep, looks
Perfect,
great.
Adam.
Great. Okay. So I'll skip over this. I've talked about that. Actually, just down at the bottom. So the healthcare experience, our company was called Unify Health. It's kind of cool, actually. The company, the brand is still around, the product's still around. Unfortunately, the company who bought it did nothing with it. But there's actually a half-life, and still, you know, I'd say probably half the customers who were using the application when we sold them the company 4 years ago, still on it.
Yeah. Hey, Adam, could I just add one caveat onto the healthcare? For those of us who aren't in healthcare anymore, this is probably the most difficult market to sell in. So I think, you know, there's an assumption here. This is a really, even if you're not in healthcare, the fact that Adam has turned around and actually made inroads here is pretty remarkable. And for those of you who need a humbling experience, I recommend going to the healthcare business and try your magic.
I think I'm sort of guilty of ignorance is bliss, because I think if I knew then what I knew now, I'm not sure I would have started a healthcare, but I'm really glad I did. And to a certain extent, I really feel the same about ABM. And maybe on a similar journey. It's certainly no less painful. So the book, Total Customer Growth, it's a bunch of things. So it's a book. I wrote the book, you know, primarily because I wanted to. There's a lot of things that we were trying to figure out, and I thought this is a good way to really get into detail on the process and to sort of document a lot of what we're doing. But the other reason is that, you know, I don't know if this is true in every single market, but I can tell you that in healthcare, for healthcare technology companies, 3 years ago, ABM was something people wanted to know about because they knew they should be doing it, but they didn't really know what it was. So it's surprising that even though ABM's been around for a while, there's been a resurgence, which I think has primarily been driven by the technology platform companies like Demandbase and 6sense. And a lot of the health tech marketers are saying, like, yeah, we really need to get our act together and understand this ABM. And so I felt like this would be a good education tool as well. And you know, let's face it, I think it can help to attract business. And so it's written as, it's probably about 20% philosophy and about 80% practical. I think it's written as a book. We try to write it as a book. Ben and I'll tell you a bit about the author, co-author in a minute, as something which you can dip into. Like, we spent a lot of time on the buyer journey, and so if you could skim through the book, and then if you're in a process of like, okay, how do you do a buyer journey again? There's a chapter on the buyer journey that you could, you could give to one of your colleagues to read as a how-to. The other thing is that we're building trying to build a learning community around that. So I've got a new website I've got two websites. I've got healthlaunchpad.com, which is the healthcare business, and then totalcustomergrowth.com, which is a new consulting firm. I'm going to see if we can, get some interest from companies outside of healthcare. But the primary thing is it becomes a community for online learning. And there's a lot of, there are a lot of calls to action in the book to go register and download templates and tools. So what we're trying to do is, just help companies learn. I think that, ABM has been kind of the domain of the big tech, venture-backed or private equity-backed firms. They've typically been the ones that have adopted the ABM platforms like Demandbase and 6 Sense, in the main. But that's still a relatively small part of US business. And so what we're trying to do is to make ABM more accessible to smaller companies who, might be intimidated and certainly get sticker shock when they learn how much this stuff costs. My co-author. So here's a real COVID thing. I met Ben Pearson, was the chief marketing officer of an enterprise software company called Nuvolo, we met. I think we actually met through his colleague through Pavilion. What was it used to be, whatever it was called before. And Ben became a client, and then Ben left about 7 or 9 months ago to do a MarTech startup, and that was that was a great inflection point for me, because I'd spent 9 months of last year not writing the book. I've made a sort of, one of my New Year's resolution in 22 was to write the book. It took me until September and Ben leaving Nuvolo to do this, because I reached out to Ben and said, hey, Ben, you want to write this together? Because Ben had used ABM and the Terminus platform to scale up the marketing operation and really been successful in it. Frankly, I've learned more about ABM from talking to Ben than anything else I'd read before. And so Ben and I wrote this book together. Interesting, this is the COVID thing about it, is I've never met Ben in person. And it's just an extraordinary, it's kind of a mind-blowing thing, is that, eventually we're gonna meet, but I feel like it's the same with Rob. Rob and I've never met in person. But it is, you can still make these connections in the virtual space. And so we wrote it, we spent most of the end of last year writing this book, and then spent the last 6 months trying to understand the publishing process. And the official launch date, the book's available, the official launch date is next Tuesday. So let's go back to what this is about. What's the problem that we're trying to address with this? And that is that, did a little survey on LinkedIn last year, and we asked a question, which is sales getting harder, easier, or is it about the same over the last few years? 90% of people said sales and marketing is getting harder. And we put that down to what we call the 5 C's, which is sales cycles are increasingly complex. And the reason they're increasingly complex is, first of all, consensus. So there are more people involved in the decision, which is a bigger buyer collectives. The buyer collective, or the buying group, the group of people who are involved in the process of selecting a new technology or a new service, is just getting bigger, and especially in healthcare for that matter. Compliance slows down decision-making. SARBOX, HIPAA in healthcare, GDPR, CCPA, etc. It just raises the risk profile for anybody trying to buy anything. Fourth is competition. Frankly, I think that AI is going to make that even worse, because I think it lowers the barrier to entry. And I think that companies can expand into new markets with new tools, new applications much more easily. But competitive choice can be overwhelming for buyer groups. And then the last one, which I think is the most interesting one, is that the buyer is increasingly in control. So, you know, the wide availability of information, of freely available information on the internet, means that buyers don't need to talk to a vendor until really late in the sales, in their decisioning process. So this is a little chart that I borrowed from one of my favorite business-to-business books called The Challenger Customer. It was written by the guys who wrote The Challenger Sale. And actually a couple of the guys who wrote that also recently wrote The Jolt Effect. It's based on, and it's a really great book. I mean, they based it on, they based the premise of the book on 3,000 interviews with business-to-business buyers. And this is, you know, one of the insights from this is that they looked at the stages that buyer collectives, the group making decisions, go through. And basically, in simple terms, there are 3 stages, right? There's defining the problem that they're trying to solve, thinking about the options that are available to them, and then selecting a supplier. And what they found was that the process of actually selecting a vendor is relatively easy. That's actually, they get aligned on that really pretty quickly. Figuring out, getting on the same page in terms of what the problem is they're trying to solve is pretty hard for them. The hardest bit is actually to figuring out what are their options. You know, should I do it? Should we do this with existing technology? Should we build our own? Should we buy something? Should we partner? You know, what are the different things? And this is where they actually have the greatest challenges. And so, you know, as B2B salespeople, we can make the greatest impact as advisors by providing information, by providing expertise early on in the process. And when we've got relationships, we get in the door and we do that. The problem is that we don't get brought in until much, much later. And I think it's either, I've got a stat on this in a couple of slides actually, that I think it's almost close to 2/3 of buyers have made a decision on which vendor they're going to go with by the time they reach out to vendors. And we've all been in that process. Mm-hmm. So, you know, ABM and some of the technologies, I'm going to show this in, you know, in a little bit, is about being able to actually engage with people earlier in the buying process. The other problem is what I call the 557 problem. And so if you think about, you know, as a rule of thumb, companies replace the software or a service provider every 5 years. You know, some cases it's longer, some cases it's shorter. But as a rule of thumb, it's about 5 years. So that means that if you've got a total available market, you know, 1,000 companies or whatever it is, of your total available market at any given time, any given year, only 20% of those companies are in market. And probably in any given quarter, there's only really a quarter of them, 5%, that are actually in market for your products. So this is called the 595 problem. It's relatively well known. You may be familiar with it. I think it's worse than that, because if you apply that, it's 57%, that only 57% of buyers are actually open to hearing from a new vendor. Your actual market of companies that are really open to hearing from you is about 2% of your available market. And so that's why, you know, traditional sort of mass B2B marketing is very inefficient, because you're probably, you know, 98% of your marketing may be wasted. It's not the old sound that say they all want to make a quote of 50% of my advertising doesn't work. I just don't know which one. It's 98% potentially. And so that's where ABM comes in, because it's about finding who might be in market and targeting your marketing specifically to them in a very targeted and personalized way. So for those of you who may not know what ABM is, let me just, so this is kind of the definition that we use. There are a bunch of definitions out there. This is the way we try to do it as simply as possible. First of all, it's a focus on best fit accounts. So best fit account is accounts that, you know, that reflect your ideal customer profile with some additional characteristics that make them more likely to buy. So when I started my business, we came up with what we call the Goldilocks accounts. So they were healthcare systems that were not too big. So, you know, they could take a risk with a smaller company like ours, and they were not too small that they wouldn't have the budget to be able to buy our software. And the other aspect of it was we decided early on that we were going to sell locally. We were going to go on site to all the customers that we're trying to sell to actually make sure that the implementation worked well. And so we needed to be able to drive to them. So we were able to sort of, you know, do I think a 200-mile, it was 100-mile circle around our offices in New Jersey, and then figured out where the hospitals were. And then we figured out which ones met those best fit. So that was our best fit characteristic. The other thing, which is I wish I'd had at this point, but when I was running my software company, is the ability to pinpoint who is in market. And this is where intent data comes in. And so I don't know what the familiarity is on the folks watching this of what intent data is, but intent data, there are lots of different types of it. There are lots of different vendors. One of the most well-known is a company called Bombora. What they do is they aggregate buying signals across the internet from millions of interactions across thousands of websites. And they can tell you which companies are interested in topics that may be relevant to you. So I'm going to show this in a second, but for example, one of my clients is in the language services space. And so we can identify the hospital systems that are showing a high interest for language services at this particular moment in time, which would suggest that they're in market for that. The third thing, which is what I showed earlier on, which is trying to reach them earlier in the buying process with content which is designed to help them through that process. So educational content which is less about selling hard and more about helping them.
Hey, Adam, question on this, since you brought up Bombora. Let's attack a sacred cow here. Are you implying that intent data actually works?
I found it to be helpful, not all the time. I found the biggest challenge with intent data is that there's two things. One is I think the expectation is that, you know, it's going to tell you exactly who's in market. I think what it does is it improves your odds.
All right. And
I'm going to show you an example in a while of a company that's found it to be useful. The other problem with intent data is it's not like Google. You know, Google or ChatGPT for that matter is you can ask it anything and it'll give you an answer because somewhere out on the internet, the answer is there. With intent data, you're limited by the topics that are available. So Bombora has about, I think, so it's over 10,000 topics now. Sounds like a lot, but when you think about all of the industries that they cover, you can quickly get to a point where it's like, you know what, they don't have the topics that are relevant to me. So you're trying to triangulate it. If you're lucky, they might have the topics that precisely talk about that are relevant to what you do. And they may track your competitors. Quite often they don't. And so in which cases you're sort of guessing around it. What I found with intent data is it doesn't make it easier necessarily to get a response. Like it doesn't make it easier for the SDRs to actually get somebody to pick up the phone. But what they say, the SDRs say, and I've heard this multiple times, is that when we get them on the phone, they're much more engaged and we have a better hit rate. We're also seeing that, you know, we're working with one of our clients. We're working with an outsourced SDR firm that we brought on board to help this client. They're working with a cold list, and at the same time, we're feeding them in-market accounts. we're starting to see, it's early days yet, but we're starting to see that they're having a higher conversion rate with the in-market market accounts in terms of getting them, getting meetings than with the non-in-market accounts. So, I do think it works, and I think it's getting better. So let me give you an example of it. So this is one of my clients, so called AMN. Like many companies in healthcare, they're an enormous company that most of humanity hasn't heard about. AMN is actually a multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company. AMN stands for American Mobile Nursing. And so they provide staffing services to the healthcare industry. They also have a portfolio of technology-enabled solutions, one of which is actually language services. So that little green device is, you're an Arabic-speaking patient, you come into a hospital, you don't speak English very well, the nurse or the physician can get an interpreter who speaks Arabic and is medically qualified on this video device to basically translate on your behalf and interpret on your behalf. And it's a competitive market. They had been doing kind of at best old school marketing. And so one of their sales guys had seen me on a webinar and reached out and said, hey, I'd love to, we're thinking about how to use ABM. Can you come in and help us change it up? So we started working with them. The first thing is using intent data. So ZoomInfo also has intent data. I think they have about 4,000, 5,000 topics. Again, depends on what your market is. They had very good topics for language services. So this was pretty cool. The first thing that we did was we worked with their sales team to get the ZoomInfo intent data integrated with Salesforce, really simple integration, so that the SDRs, the sales development reps, the meeting bookers, right, had a list of in-market accounts. And they started using that. And since they started using that, the first thing they do every day is check that list. And the reason is that you get things like this. So this is New York Presbyterian. New York Presbyterian happened to be a big customer of AMN for staffing, but was not using their language services. So the SDR identified that New York Presbyterian was showing a very high intent for language services and professional translation. So the SDR reached out to the account manager, said, hey, we think there's an opportunity at New York Presbyterian for language services. Can you put us in touch with the director of language services? That happened. And then the director of language services says, oh yeah, it's funny you mention it. We're about to start an RFP and didn't know that you guys actually did that. You're in. So that was that they found that in week one. So they got, they became big believers in the power of this from day one. So this is, this is saying that. The other thing that we did was, a fairly low tech approach to this. We ran a very targeted LinkedIn campaign. So what we did was we took a very defined set of accounts and a narrow set of titles, and we loaded that up into LinkedIn and run ads targeted at the specific of those people. And it's interesting is when you start to do this, you find that your spending on advertising goes down quite dramatically, because there's a limit to how much you can actually spend to reach these relatively targeted audiences. We then applied a filter. So what we did was we took the intent data and we said, okay, we've got a long list of, I can't remember, 1,000 accounts. Well, let's actually just see who's in market. Looks like only 200 accounts are in market. Let's double down and just only advertise to those those accounts. And what we found by doing that was a significant increase in ad effectiveness. Initially, the engagement rate, I think, went up to about 200%. went up by 200%, and then plateaued at about 50% higher effectiveness. So we kind of knew that we were reaching a much more engaged audience by doing that. And this is it's a very rough, this is a very sophisticated dashboard, right? But what we're able to show the clients on a week-by-week basis is, here are the accounts that we've advertised to, and this is who's engaging. And so this client here, LifePoint, they actually became a customer within 6 months, because the SDRs started to see that this was an account that was in market and handed them over to the salespeople.
Yeah. Hey, Adam, I'm just going through some of the questions here, and this is rather timely. Michael Girarded was asking, and I think you just kind of covered it, but maybe a bit more detail. Michael asked, can you explain more about how you knew the prospect was in market for language services? Or was it solely on intent, or was it something else besides that?
So we're using two signals. So intent data. So hang on. So the intent data was one of the signals.
Mm-hmm.
The other signal is ad engagement. So, for clients that, if you just take the principle of intent, we have several clients where just the intent data just isn't going to work, because what they do is too obscure for the current intent topics. We can tell based on the responsiveness to the advertising. And because LinkedIn is very expensive on a CPM basis, but if you run it to, if you're really precise with who you run it to, so you say, okay, we've got a very carefully selected list of accounts. We've taken the total available market of 1,000. We've narrowed it down to 400 that really are best fit for us. We've got a very specific set of titles. We find that we're spending, with many clients, $1,000 to $1,500 a month on advertising, and we're getting advertising wear out really quickly, which means that we're saturating that audience. I mean, it's surprising, actually. One of the biggest challenges is that you've got to keep the message fresh, because you're getting it in front of the same people over and over again. But we use responsiveness to advertising as signal of intent. Wow. So what we're doing is and then there's a thing you can do with LinkedIn, which is kind of interesting, was that LinkedIn won't tell you specifically who at these accounts is responding, right? They're not going to tell you, oh, okay, here are the 6 people who clicked on the ads, but they know. And so you can actually double down and run a next level message, like a more of a salesy message specifically to them through LinkedIn. Again, you don't know, but LinkedIn knows, and they can target those people individually as long as you've got enough contact. They can build a big enough audience to do that.
Yeah. So Adam, you doing this, was it with or without an ABM platform at this point?
No ABM platform.
Yeah. So this is actually a really important point.
Yeah. In fact, we're actually just adopting an ABM platform. Most of our clients don't use an ABM platform. And that's part of what we're trying to do with the book is, and I actually think that that there are many companies. You probably, many of the folks on this call are doing a lot of what we do from an ABM standpoint without actually having a platform. So it's sort of interesting to sort of aside on the platform thing. So I kind of look, there are the big ABM vendors. So there are companies like Demandbase and Sixth Sense that have this amazing technology that will show you who's in market and help you automate a campaign specifically to them, and integrate with your CRM. And so it can really make the sales and marketing process much more targeted and much more efficient. But they're expensive. Prices coming down. There are some lower cost vendors, and they're complicated. What we figured out, we kind of figured out, so the thing about it is that Demandbase, if you take the top ABM vendors, and there's about a dozen of them, I kind of think that there's less than 5,000 companies have adopted their platforms, which is a really small number, right? But HubSpot's well over 100,000. However, I think there is a long tail of companies out there that are doing bits of ABM or doing ABM in a much more manual way, just using the sort of basic principles. And that's frankly the purpose of the book is, getting an ABM platform is going to make your life a lot easier, but you don't need to. You can actually do a lot of this without this. It's funny, I was talking to a guy the other day who's, kind of a really well regarded ABM expert. He was the ABM leader at some very significant companies. He said he's been doing ABM for 8 years, has never used one of these platforms.
Yeah, I think this is powerful. And a lot of the marketers, as I've been doing my surveys for companies that are having problems with their pipeline, the response I'm getting from most of them is that, yeah, we don't have the budget for ABM. And my response is, do you know what ABM is? Right. And in their mind, it's like ABM means I spend a lot of money on a platform. But you just said something powerful here. The numbers that you just cited, the HubSpot comparison versus the ABM providers is pretty substantial. And I think, once folks understand that, there's a different approach here. And I really like what you're talking about with multiple signals. That's the other thing worth mentioning here. A single signal approach, i.e. intent data, because there's been a side dialogue here about people throwing rocks at intent data only. The reality is intent data is only part of the mix. And the second signal can really change the efficacy of for your SDR teams in particular.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's your question, your point there is well taken. I think there's a lot of mystique about ABM. And I think that most people have the perception it's like, if I'm going to do ABM, I've got to spend $100,000 on demand base or $50,000 on Terminus or whatever it happens to be. I think the bigger issues is that it is a fundamental change in the way that sales and marketing operate. So, the often repeated thing about ABM is that it fails unless sales and marketing are aligned. And aligned doesn't mean like, yeah, we both agree we're going to do it. It means you're working together in the trenches, day in, day out. You get out of your silos. And in fact, one of the things that we've realized that we need to do in the work that we're clients is that we're changing the rules now with our clients, which is we won't start the project unless sales and particularly the SDRs are actively involved in this project. Because that's actually the crux of it, is that handover between marketing and the SDRs. Because, the SDRs are sort of used to working in a silo. They've got their list, they market to the list, they're working closely with the salespeople. And suddenly, marketing gives them another list, which is, here's your intent signals. It's like, which list do I start with? And so it's about educating them like, look, we think that these people are in market. We don't know for sure. And we don't know exactly who, but it could be these people at that account. But we think it's going to increase your odds. And that's what it's about, right? It's not perfection. It is about improving the probability that you're going to convert a sale. The other problem is even if you don't spend the money on a big platform, it is a big investment in time, because you've got to stop doing what you were doing before, or at least, do something different at the same time. And the thing that we see, and we hear this day in, day out, is that first attempts often fail. And then we find that clients get, we see this, we experience this too. Clients get cold feet. It's like, because it takes a long time, frankly, to get the results. Why I believe it works is that, and I've seen this firsthand, and I've seen other data that supports this, is that with ABM, you get fewer leads, but they're better quality leads, and it generates more pipeline. So, the alternative are things like syndicated content, right? Where you've got a white paper, you give it to, Netline or Infused Media or somebody like that, or HIMS or whoever it happens to be, and they go out and they bring you back 300 leads. And you know that of those 300 leads, 90% of them are going to be junk. And so you might get 30 prospects out of that, and maybe you can get 5 of them to take a meeting. So it's not very efficient, right? Yeah. But you generated 300 leads.
Yeah, this is lead counts, whether we like it or not. And we had Jeff Hoffman on last month, who focuses on SDR training. I would love to have both of you guys in a room together, maybe in the future, because this would be a great dialogue. So you alluded to something, and I want to pull the thread. Oftentimes organizations struggle, and especially those of us who instrumented, our CRM systems for a specific workflow, et cetera. It becomes nearly impossible to change Salesforce, okay, or to make changes, gradually. However, on the ABM approach is rather radical. Have you seen, is there a way to do this piecemeal? Okay, and just, let me take a subset of the SDRs, and let me do this, because that sounds like a way to get in the game without having to totally re-engineer your organization.
I think that's possible. I think the integrations, though, so it's interesting. So we're working with one company that was in the process of, they were going to go full demand base, and they've had to postpone it by a year because of a whole bunch of reasons. But one of the primary reasons is that they're doing a big rationalization with Salesforce. However, with this, we were able to give them a simple integration between the Zoom info intent data and Salesforce, so that there's a list that appears. It's actually you can do it with some pretty light touch integrations. I think there are some low hurdle ways of doing it. Yeah. In the book, we talk about ABM platform, but we also talk about there's some simple tools out there that really take very little effort to use, where you can create your own kind of like low cost, small budget tech stack to do ABM.
Huge point, Adam. This is a really big deal, and I think the takeaway for a lot of folks here is I think this is a critically important thing that's ignored by the market. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I mean, for example, you can license Bombora data directly. It's bloody expensive, but you can do it. You can license Zoom info data directly. There are tools like Leadlander or Leadfeeder. I'm sure many people have heard of that, where you just drop a piece of code on your website and you can tell on a daily basis some of the accounts that are hitting your website. Again, it's not perfect, but it can tell you, it can give you some indicative data. It just means that you've got to be much more sort of manual and really get into the weeds of figuring out what's going on. The big systems automate this and make this a lot simpler for you, particularly at scale. The other issue is that I think ABM is becoming ABC, which is account-based confusing, because there's a festival of acronyms out there. There's ABX, and frankly, ABX is account-based experience. Also, some people call it ABE. And the notion there is ABM started off, frankly, being much more about how do you grow revenue from existing relationships, and has moved, I think, primarily driven by the technology companies, to be much more about customer acquisition. So ABX is about actually the second part. Although it gets confusing because some people talk about it being the whole part, which is what total customer growth is. And other people, the whole thing has got to become very confusing. I even heard ABGTM the other day, which is sort of tagging on to the Sangram Vrajay, GTM movement. And so it's something which is, hard for people to get their heads around initially. And it's just getting more bloody confusing.
Yeah, Adam, Ian was asking about, and you just alluded to it, as a way to upsell, cross-sell.
Yes. Yeah.
And so could you just,
Sure.
Attach to what you just said here? Does this tie in a bit? And
this is exactly, and this is what I'll cut to the chase here, because what we're trying to do here is simplify what ABM is about by focusing on the most important thing, which is the buyer journey. And by that, I mean the total buyer journey, from from finding people and turning them into customers, becoming a customer, and then growing your business with them over time. And that's what total customer growth is about thinking about the total lifetime of your customer, from meeting them all the way through to turning them into an evangelist for your company that'll help you, buy more stuff from you, but also help you turn future prospects into customers. And so this is what the notion of total customer growth is. And so what we're showing here with this bit of animation is, most of the ABM vendors out there, let me stop the animation, focus on, the problem solving, evaluation, these 3 steps: problem solving, evaluating, and deciding. What we're trying to do here is to think about this in a holistic way. Some people refer to this as ABX. The reason why we're using total customer growth is ABX, I think, is a confusing term. You can call it ABX if you want, that's fine. But we think about it as the total customer relationship. The other thing that's important here is what you can do to turn your customers into your most effective sales and marketing weapon. And there's a whole chapter on the book dedicated to how you can do, turn your customers into your biggest influencers, or at least if you've got customers who are dissatisfied, figure out who they are early and neutralize their ability to have a negative influence on your future sales. And the way that we think about it is in 4 basic steps. Early on in the customer journey, your job is to identify intent. So just use all the tools that are available to you. Third-party intent, activity on your website, what you know about, what account intelligence that you can get to identify who can be in market and place your bets on those accounts. Second thing is, how do you engage them? And so there's a whole chapter in the book about ways to approach the development of content and marketing tactics that are based on how buyers buy, not necessarily on what, product marketing might think is the most important piece of content to create. The role of conversion. So this is where the relationship with SDRs come in. And then lastly is the notion of long-term customer growth. Whole section of the book is dedicated specifically to that. And sort of interesting, so for me, it's a little bit full circle, because before I started the healthcare business, what I was actually doing was getting, particularly for a lot of advertising agencies, going out and getting real insight about their current clients. And I'd actually basically adopted a methodology which I'd had work for me. And when I was at this company, Organic, we engaged this company, Relationship Audits, who we ended up working with, to assess the relationship with one of our clients. And we had a good, a good little retainer, a $4 million a year retainer. Every year, we engaged this company, Relationship Audits, to go out and interview our customers and tell us the hard facts about the relationship. So they tell us what they like, they told us what improvements they need to make, but they'd also tell us what they needed us to focus on to grow the relationship. Some of the things were obvious. Some of the things were helpful to me because I could use it as ammunition with my management to make certain key hires, but it kept the team really focused on what was most important. Over the course of 5 years, we grew that relationship from $4 million to $40 million. And I believe that insight about the account was absolutely critical to this. So there's a whole chapter in the book specifically about that.
Okay, aligned with that, Adam, is in the book you also talk about, and you were a little bit skeptical on NPS. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, first of all, I think NPS is fantastic. I think it's a wonderful tool. That relationship, the relationship between likelihood to recommend and satisfaction, I think, is a really, really great insight. I believe it works brilliantly in consumer businesses, and I use it in my software business to understand user level satisfaction. I don't think it works well in complex business to business relationships, and the reason is that, you know, you've got to get the right people to respond. And if you do an NPS survey across your customer base, you know, are the key people going to complete the survey? Maybe not. And then the second thing is that, you know, are they going to tell you really what's important? I find that a lot of what we need to know, you really only find out by doing one-on-one interviews. And so this company, Relationship Audits, I referenced in the book I work with, have developed a methodology which is a bit like NPS, but I think works much better for this type of problem. I've got massive respect for the one question methodology. I just think that it doesn't work as well as it should do in these types of situations.
Right. That's great. And if I can share more, we're kind of integrating the questions in here, and I'm reading the chat. I get a little bit of a cat fight over the role of customer service, customer success. You want to touch that?
Yeah, I'm so glad somebody asked that. I'm sorry, I'm not looking at the chat.
No, that's why I'm looking at it.
I get very distracted. I'm realizing in my advanced age, I'm developing ADHD later in life. So I can only focus on one thing. So yeah, you know, I think there's sort of one of the big things in ABM is talking about sort of most important thing is the alignment between sales and marketing. In total customer growth and in ABX, customer success needs to be at the table too.
Yep.
And I think, you know, it says, I kind of think that if you know, that customer success comes in here, is obviously critical in the onboarding phase, and then owns that relationship. You know, it's interesting. We're actually use with one of our clients, we've actually been using intent data to identify who's potentially at risk. You know, so you can get competitor names. By the way, you can actually, you know, if you have a relationship with one of the intent data, you can give them topics that you want them to track, and over time they will do that. So if you have competitors, you can see the intensity of whether your clients are looking at that, and that's really useful to customer success. I think where customer success and marketing work closely together is in things like champion customer programs, where, you know, you figure out who the customers are, who are most, you know, who are likely to want to evangelize for you, and create ways for them to do that. And I think that's where client success and marketing need to be at the table. And it's really, you know, it's something that's very important to me personally, because I spent, you know, 20-something years of my life in advertising and digital advertising and consulting on the client as an account person. And so you know, not as a salesperson. And so you know, and I can, and the growth, that growth I referenced there was all by account management and by insights about the customer.
Hey, Adam, this is Dave Hall. So in your current slide here, you've got identify an intent. And when you started this session, you talked about a higher success rate if you got to the client earlier than later.
Yes.
Okay, so the main issue for me is that the biggest competitor is not your competitor, it's the status quo.
Yeah.
It's not doing anything at all. And it seems like if you don't get to those folks early, they don't have enough data in order to make a decision.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about the status quo?
Yeah, that's great. I think status quo, actually, the sort of status quo, I think, has an impact both on the front and the back end of a sale. So on the front end, you know what, you know, the notion of a customer champion, right? I always like to think of the sort of what we're looking for is the maniac with a mission. which is who's that person in the organization who is looking to advance their career by making some kind of a change within the organization. So who's the person who's going to stick their neck out and say, hey, we need to bring these guys in because they can really help change up what we do. So, you know, and I think that means is that you're writing a lot of content and you're changing the marketing to address them as best as possible. So I think that's where, you know, that can help. I don't think that, you know, at the sort of budgets that we're talking about, that you can change a market to overcome their inertia, right? That's a very, very expensive thing to do, and we're not certainly in that area.
Well, I think Adam just created a phenomenal new acronym, an MWAM, a maniac with a mission. So Rob, we need to take care of that.
Yeah, I love it. Thanks, Dave. Hey,
just the one other point though, just the other place where I think inertia is really important is that end of the deal. It's like we've all been in this, right? Where you're very close to closing a sale and suddenly they go quiet on you. And there's a fantastic book, which many of you may know, which came out last year, called The Jolt Effect, which talks all about that and how to address that. And for one of our clients is actually, I think we're basing our strategy on that.
Oh, interesting word saying. Hey, Adam, we could probably get about 5 minutes left, and we've just, you know, we could, there's just hitting a lot of key topics. I want to make sure that we don't miss anything as your close.
So the book comes in 4 parts. What is total customer growth? Strategic foundations, how to put ABM into action. So how you can get started with or without technology, how you can move from ABM to ABX, total customer growth, and then how to scale it in your company. So the different stages that we call it think, crawl, walk, run. And there's a whole system on that. The book is actually available now. The launch date is next week. It's available for half price. So I'll put in a second. Maybe you could send a link out to the Amazon to the Amazon store, and it's available half price until next Tuesday. So you know, don't wait.
Yeah. So Adam, I want to hit folks with questions, and I'll have a final one. So and Adam, if you could put your contact, there you go. Perfect. So for folks on the call, are there any questions that we haven't covered? And feel free to chime in. You don't have to do it via chat unless you're shy. But you know, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. Anything that we haven't covered, because I've got one, then we have the book giveaway as well.
You know, this is Mark Manuel, Rob. I really loved this presentation. And because I come from a sales focus, it just seems to me that SDRs have been trained to think very differently than ABM. More is better. It's like SEO, they're getting leads from everybody, versus, you know, a focus on certain accounts. And I'm just curious what you've done to help train those SDRs on that SWAT team to be able to have a different approach, one of curiousness, because you don't want to tell people, you know, what they were on your site, that you were doing this stuff. That's Edward Snowden treatment. I'm just curious.
It's really hard. I would say we're not universally successful in it. You know, again, I think what we're really working with our clients to say is, look, please get the SDRs involved from the start, even if it's just 1 or 2 of them. So that's part of it, is making them feel included in the process. But I think the key thing is, look, this is not magic. Because I've made the mistake of making a big deal of giving intent data to the SDRs, and they think, oh great, everybody's going to pick up the phone, and so they don't. Obviously, it doesn't. You know, this doesn't make it easier necessarily to get somebody to respond. However, what you'll find is that when you get somebody on the phone, they are going to be more engaged, and when they experience that, so you just need those, you know. With some clients, we get lucky and we get some early wins, and that's where, you know, that's where it's, you know, that's where it works really well. You know, the other thing that we're working with one client, they're really trying to move into social selling. So making that part of it, because with social selling, it's much harder to do that at scale. So it's like, okay, these accounts seem to be in market, focus your social selling on those. That's kind of the way that we're using it. I don't pretend that we've got it cracked, because we certainly don't.
Perfect. Thanks, Adam. And Adam, just before we do the book giveaway, so what are we always look for something actionable, and you've covered a lot of actionable things. So for everybody on the call, what are the 1 or 2 things that they should do this afternoon after hearing what you said?
Boy, I should have thought that's one beforehand. Number 1, targeting, account selection. It's like, honestly, it's probably the most important thing, which is, do you have a good process around account selection? And so, you know, ask your sales partner, or if you are the sales partner, ask yourself, have I really done the best thing I possibly can to be disciplined about the accounts that I select? So that's number 1. Number 2, start planning an experiment. And again, this doesn't have to be all singing or dancing, you know, with a low bar, which is, if we took a small group of these accounts and did an ABM experiment, we tried a more personalized approach with them. You know, if you can get hold of some intent data, try using some intent data. Design an experiment that you can start using. The third thing is actually kind of not related to this, is get smart about social selling. Because I do think that AI is going to help automate a lot of this stuff. And so when everybody's doing this, you know, when you know, Demand-Based and those guys have got the same level of penetration as HubSpot, and everybody's, you know, everybody's got the same weapons. What are you going to have that you can't actually, that technology can't do better than you at? And that, I think, is social selling. I haven't really covered this much in this, but I actually believe that's a big differentiator.
Excellent. Adam, this is terrific. So Pam, do we we've got the giveaway, and we've got a copy, and contact me and we'll mail it. So Pam, do we have a winner here today?
Yeah, we certainly do. So first of all, thanks, Adam, for joining us, and thanks for bringing these fresh new insights into ABM. I mean, this is another example of a great SAMI session where there's a lot of great collaboration, and people leave buzzing, ready to implement and try out different ideas even today. And just a reminder to everybody, the recording will be available soon via the Meetup group. So for this book of Adams, we have a very scientific criteria for giving away this prize. So I wrote down on a little sheet of paper all the people who contributed to the chat, and I'm going to randomly pick one by pointing to the name. And it looks like it is Mark Gallowboy, who is the winner of our book. So I think Rob,
lucky
got it.
You, Mark. If you're having problems sleeping, this is going to help too.
Now I have to learn how to read.
So it couldn't happen for a better guy, Mark. This is your area, one of your key areas anyway. So I'm sure you'll get a lot from the book. So just sync up with Rob, and we'll get that book in the mail to you.
Just one thing is I don't pretend for any reasons to have all the answers. I don't know I think John Russo was maybe on this, and he is a guru on that. It's something I really follow. And so, you know, if you got feedback, if there's anything you disagree with, please let me know. Because just make the second edition better.
That's great.
This is great, Adam. And like everything else, anybody who professes expertise, we know they're lying. And all of us who, we've had our pain points too. That's why when you opened up and said, yeah, I can talk about 2 wins, I don't want to talk about the other 4. That's all of us. And so, and that's, we got to keep experimenting. And what was really powerful about today's presentation is that we've got to keep experimenting, because what applies today may not work tomorrow. So on behalf of everybody, I want to say thank you, and my cohorts on SAMI, great session. Adam, thanks for making us a little bit smarter today, or a little more skeptical. So, yeah, this will be great.
Either
So,
way.
so
Good.
Pam, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, just have a great day. Think about some of these ideas and watch the meetup group for announcements of our fall lineup. As Rob said, we're working on some really cool stuff, including 2 ideas and 2 speakers that would dovetail very, very nicely into what we were talking about today. So stay tuned for that. We're working on some great stuff. And I guess I'll just wish everybody a great summer.
Yeah. And thanks, Adam.
Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
All right.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.